Welcome to 10 Kids, 2 Docs. I'm Dr. Vivian Carlin, and I'm joined by my dear friend and co-host, Dr. Sylvia Bank. Between our two households, we're navigating life with 10 children, so we know how chaotic parenting can be. As Johns Hopkins trained pediatricians, we also know the science. Our goal is to bring you the best of both worlds, medically sound, trustworthy advice, and practical, real-world insights as we dive into the trials and triumphs of parenting. Please note this podcast is not intended to be a substitute for medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment from your doctor.
Today we are going to record our second episode on executive functioning. If you haven't yet heard our first episode, I suggest you go back and listen to that first, because that episode goes into detail about the definition of executive functioning and what it looks like in a neurotypical child.
Yeah, today we're going to try to tackle what executive functioning looks like as it's developing in a child with ADHD.
So just a quick recap from our first episode about the definition of executive functioning. There are 3 different deficits, so to speak, when someone is struggling with executive functioning. And those deficits, as we outlined in more detail in the first episode, is 1, difficulty with working memory. Number 2, cognitive inflexibility, like the inability to kind of flex and do things in a different way. And number 3 was inhibition control, some difficulties in controlling yourself. And when there's a deficit in 1, 2, or all 3 of those streams, then that can present as executive functioning problems.
Yeah, I like this definition of executive functioning because it gives me an easier framework to think about the behaviors that are manifesting as a deficit in executive functioning. And I want to say right off the bat, any story that we could tell could happen with a child who has ADHD or who does not have ADHD. It's so much about the scope, the amount that it's interfering with their function in life, the amount of problems or difficulties that you see over long periods of time, how it's crossing over in other areas of their life. I think when I try to think about what is a little bit different with executive functioning and ADHD in some cases, I think what we should do is discuss examples of what that looks like at home. Because for neurotypical kids, a lot of times the only time we see it when it really comes out is that transition from elementary to middle school, where at school, suddenly there's these greater expectations of how they manage their stuff and their time, right? Mm-hmm. Whereas I think in ADHD, a lot of parents can relate these executive functioning issues come out before then, and they are seen not just at school, they're also seen at home.
Right. I think that's a really good point.
So let me give you some examples of how deficits in executive functioning have manifested in my home with children with ADHD. So I mentioned in a previous episode in ADHD the example of a child who fidgets with things to the point of taking them apart, right? So I have a child that loves to take things apart, loves to find the screwdrivers and take apart things, really fascinated by that. And one of the challenges earlier on was if you take apart the remote, nobody can watch the TV, including yourself, right? So you would think that this could be as simple as, oh, you took apart the remote. Now you're facing the consequence of not watching TV and the consequence of other people being frustrated with you. And now I'm just going to sit you down and explain to you why you shouldn't do that. And you feel remorse and you understand the rule not to take the remote apart. And now it doesn't happen again, right? This would be like a logical progression in our minds. But what that requires, when we look back at this definition of executive functioning, it requires that the next time you have that remote with all of its rubbery, shiny buttons in your hand, there needs to be an inhibition control to not take it apart. There needs to be a working memory. Something in your brain needs to trigger that, oh no, if I take this remote apart, this is what's going to happen because it's happened to me before. There should be something triggering, I should not do this because I remember what happened before. I remember having this discussion. I remember the rule. I remember the consequences, all of those things. If that is not there, then it's just that moment of the remote being in your hand, shiny and interesting and wanting to see how it works. Then you take it apart before you realize all of these other consequences that you already encountered, right? This is why when you think about this example, this could be seen very much as defiance. There's a clear rule here and you broke it, right? You know the rule and you broke it. But when you put it in the context of ADHD and developing executive functioning, you also can start to see it with a component of something in your brain did not trigger for you that the rule was there. Like that
Right.
working memory was not there. And that moment when the inhibition control wasn't there and the working memory wasn't there, like that bell ringing in your brain that we all expect wasn't there yet, right? So in that case, the child may feel like significant remorse and sad that they did it and be very ready to apologize and to talk to you about what happened. But there doesn't necessarily mean that in the future they're going to act differently because these developing mechanisms haven't come in yet. And I think in this example, this is where, parents with children with ADHD or other diagnoses can have these situations happen that are breaking the rule, that seem defiant, and they'll express this frustration. You may have heard this in the office of, there is no consequence I can give this child that prevents this from happening in the future, right? I can't reward it away. Like I can create a sticker chart, but it doesn't ever guarantee that that's going to prevent it from happening in the future. I also can't punish it away. Like there's no punishment that I could give this child that prevents it from happening again. And that's where you really see this rub, that this is like a developing neurologic skill that is not there yet. So we can't put this expectation that these other methods are going to work until that skill comes in. I think another example that comes to mind that I think a lot of parents with kids with ADHD can relate to, that's not quite as specific, is the degree of impulse control that it requires to not turn on the TV or video games or whatever electronics you have, right? We know that ADHD brain, I think there's even more of a susceptibility to the addictive nature of screens. And there's also that lack of inhibition control and that lack of working memory, remembering the rules and the consequences, right? So I think this becomes even more of a challenge. So I'll give you another very practical example in my house is that as one of my children was getting a little bit older, we realized that there would be nights that that child would go and turn on the TV in the middle of the night for a long time, right? And then the next day they would be like really cranky and hadn't slept well. And when we would discuss that with them, they would admit it. There was like a remorse that this happened, like I know, like I feel terrible the next day. And even an acknowledgement of, I can't control this. I think the solution for us, the TV remote gets locked up. And this child is very amenable to that. So after they've had TV time, will bring me the remote and be like, okay, it's time to put it away. And there's almost a gratitude of like, thank you for removing the temptation, right?
Do you have any other examples of maybe what executive functioning difficulties look like in the ADHD child in middle school?
Right. This is where socially we start to see children with ADHD may get into more trouble in middle school because an impulse to act out for attention in order to try to fit in the peer group, to say something like really crazy, like, somebody's saying, I don't like that teacher. And then the kid with ADHD might be the one that escalates that to like an inappropriate level or something that seems violent and has to be seen by the principal. It's also a similar principle to how part of the reason that screens tend to be more addictive for children with ADHD is that their brain is like seeking that higher level of stimulation. And sometimes that can also come out socially where there's impulsivity and there's also that like seeking of that higher level of stimulation, which might cause them to speak more loudly, more often, more aggressively, those kinds of things that can also get them in trouble that is still part of executive functioning.
Right. I think that's a really good point.
Hopefully we've painted a little bit of a picture of what executive functioning deficits can look like in a child with ADHD. Let's now transition and talk about how once we recognize that, we can use that knowledge to help our kids develop better executive functioning skills. Okay, I think when I think about, that parent that's just really distraught about these poor executive functioning skills in their child, I would start with like, let's remember what the goals are. What are the end goals with what we want to achieve in helping our children develop executive functioning? Okay, and obviously eventually we need them to develop a job readiness, right?
Right.
Like they can get to a job on time, they can do what's asked of them, they can switch tasks if needed. Like
Right.
they have the foresight to like look ahead and think like, I need to keep working this job so I have money to pay for this or that or whatever. And then I also think we want to help our children achieve the academic success that matches their ability without feeling like they're failing due to their executive functioning, right? So, if my child is going to take these advanced classes and has the intellect and ability and desire to do it, I want them to be able to do it and not be held so much back by this poor executive functioning. Like I want to help them get to that level, right?
Yeah.
So I feel like these are kind of these overarching goals and why are we helping? How are we helping? So specifically thinking about like working memory and impulsivity together, I gave that example of the remote getting taken apart and how frustrating that can be. This isn't like early school age. I think at that age, a big part of supporting them is to take away the temptation. So, right, at that point, I'm not high in on the training to independence and not doing that. I need to get you to get a little bit older and me to be a little bit less frustrated. So the remote is going to be kept with me and it's not going to sit on the TV table anymore, right? Like I'm going to hand it to you when you're going to watch something and you're going to hand it back to me.
You're going to set your child up for success instead of setting them up for failure, right?
Yes. So when I say all these things about preparing them for job readiness, it's with a margin of, okay, but at these really early ages, just survive. Like just do what you need to do to make life more pleasant for everybody. But then after that, the term that gets used a lot is scaffolding. This idea of creating a support system. While the building is being built, the support system is there on the outside. And then as the building goes up, the support system gradually comes down, right? So we're doing these measures to scaffold them while they're developing these skills internally. So what you described with your son is perfect for that, right? Like gosh, I loved in our first episode, you laid out for him, these are the 7 steps that have to happen for you to successfully turn in a homework assignment and not get a 0. That's part of the scaffolding. You're breaking it down for him. With the story about the string on his finger, like you're teaching him to create for himself a visual reminder that like, when I see this, I'm going to remember that I have to go turn in those photos so mom isn't charged for these photos that she didn't want anyway, that were really bad. Right? This is all scaffolding. For a child with a diagnosis of ADHD or autism who struggles with executive functioning, this is part of a 504. This is part of an IEP. Like, let's create scaffolding in the school. So I have a story about this with my children. So one of mine with ADHD, also, of course, turning in homework was always a big issue. The homework would get done. It was never a fight to get the homework done. It would just never get turned in, ever. And so throughout her elementary school career, this was part of her scaffolding with her 504, right?
Okay.
So for a long time in elementary school and in 4th and 5th grade, they were changing classes. Part of the scaffolding was part of your 504 is that you, at the end of the day, are going to touch base with the teacher and you're going to give her all of your homework. So it's not like, I need you to remember when the teacher says turn in the homework to turn it in, because that was just not a realistic goal at that point.
Right.
This child, she has done so well. I'm so proud of her and how she's overcome. But one of the things I love is that she has very good self-insight. And I can ask her now, like, what works for you and what doesn't, right? So she'll describe with this area of homework, which has gotten so much better. And she'll say, in middle school now, she'll say, if the teacher has a homework basket sitting on their desk and it stays in the same place every day, I turn in my homework. If the basket moves, or if the teacher just says randomly at some point during the class, now turn in your homework, I don't do it, right? So she is describing how she has developed one of the executive functioning components of using a visual cue for that nonverbal memory of I've got to turn in my homework. She's developed that really well. Like she knows the basket is there. As soon as she sees it, she turns in her homework. Great. If that's not there, if that scaffolding isn't there, then she has trouble, right? So this is the stage that she's working on. She's come so far, right? Like most of the time, homework's getting turned in independently.
That's great.
So great. But the scaffolding is there, the support of the 504 is there to prevent her from failing because of this difficulty in executive functioning as a result of her ADHD. Because academically she's doing great, but she would be failing even just missing those assignments for the classes where the teacher doesn't have the basket, right? Again, that's that example of wanting to give them the support with the goal as we go into high school that this scaffolding needs to come down so that she can be job or college ready later. So I asked her, like, well, what if you have to remember something important that is unusual, like something that you want to remember that isn't part of your daily routine? And she had a great answer. She was like, okay, this week, my friend loaned me her jacket because it was cold, and I brought it home. And I knew I needed to remember to bring it back to her. So I took a Sharpie and I wrote it on my arm.
It's like the string tied around the finger, right?
Yes. I mean, like Sharpie on the arm. Okay. I'm not crazy about it, but I don't even care. I'm like so excited. And she will often come home with like lists on her arm in pen. She is like recognizing this is like parents' dream. This is what we want. You're recognizing that this is difficult for you. Instead of like feeling defeated and bad about yourself, you're feeling empowered to do something about it. Like you're creatively coming up with these solutions for yourself, which right now involves writing in pen on your arm these tasks that you need to remember. Love that. I have another example. So I asked her, because we talked about executive functioning, place parents get frustrated most frequently is in academics, but it also occurs at home and socially. And so I asked her things like, well, you've gotten so much better about remembering all of the things with like personal care. A lot of kids with ADHD, it's like, gosh, we brush our teeth twice a day, every day. Why do I still have to remind you to do it, right? Like otherwise you forget and you just go to bed. I don't understand that, right? Well, a lot of kids outgrow that, as she has, where she can do it all herself. And I would ask her, like, what do you think happened where you now just remember to do all of that on your own? And she said, oh, well, that's because if I had bad breath or I smelled bad, that would be so embarrassing, right? So she has verbalized an example of executive functioning. I have in that nonverbal memory, I can picture for myself, I don't want to smell bad or look bad. And that reminds me to do everything that I need to do in the morning to be ready for school. Right?
I love this inside view in the mind of how she developed these skills. And she's so verbal and so expressive that she will share with you how that evolved in her mind, right?
I love it. I have one more example with her. This is, again, difficulties at home. Her room has always been pretty messy. And recently, as she's gotten older, I have been on her a little bit more of like, okay, this is just too messy. Well, so she cognitively can agree, like she agrees, like it shouldn't be that messy. It's a little embarrassing that's that messy. So she developed this system, which has worked really well for her, where she took sticky notes and she wrote on all of her dresser drawers and all of her desk drawers what was in them, like jeans, shirts, underwear, whatever. And when I ask her about this, like what she sees that helps her, she's like, oh, this works for me to keep my room more clean because I see the notes and I'm reminded to put the things away. And I know where I remember what's in there and I know where it goes. So this is another example of that, like what you most want is that they're not defeated by this being a difficulty. They recognize it and they feel empowered to try to help themselves be better at it. I'm like so encouraged in this child with this ADHD level of difficulty with executive functioning, starting to see this type of improvement and the things that she's doing.
In general, what I love about what you said, number one, it is very easy to get angry at your child who is failing in some of these departments. Maybe because they're getting bad grades, maybe because their room is very messy, maybe they appear to be defiant or disobedient, right? But I think the overarching advice in the stories that I've heard you say is trying to temper that and be understanding as a parent. Understand your child's challenges and try to give a little bit of parental leeway in saying it will come with time. And I think it helps to understand that it's a brain development thing as well that will improve over time.
I think this is a benefit of looking at executive functioning from those components that we talked about of working memory, self-control, cognitive flexibility. They're not perfect by any means, but it can give you some insight into this isn't actually defiance.
Yeah.
It's a deficiency in one of these areas or multiple of these areas.
So instead of being angry at your child, you understand that you can help your child instead, right? The second thing I love that you said is when your child comes up with their own organizational plan, because, they're encouraged to, either through school, through a 504, or through their own methods, it may not be the way that you would organize yourself, right?
Yeah.
Like writing all over your arm or having sticky notes all over your room.
Yes.
But, for parents to allow their child to develop their organizational skills without too much criticism or interference. I think that's hard for parents to do, to say, that's not the way I would do it. Why don't you do it this way? Well, they're developing their own organization, and to give them the space to do so instead of micromanaging that or criticizing that.
Yes. Yeah.
And then the last thing that I wanted to point out from what you said is this hope for the future. Parents are often very upset when there's executive functioning difficulties in the transition to middle school and the grades are not where they should be. And of course, their minds go to like, oh, my child is failing at school. I am so worried. But to allow your parental worry to temper and say, this is a developing skill. Even though my child is not good at this yet, doesn't mean that they're not going to graduate high school, right? Like allow them the space to learn. And this is what we've talked about in past episodes about allowing our children to fail a little bit in order to have independent success, to not be on them about the perfect execution of executive functioning the first day of sixth grade. There is a transition, and to be understanding and mindful that it's okay for them to not be doing it perfectly right away. Right. So hopefully in this episode, we've given some parenting tips and tricks on where to start in beginning to teach your children executive functioning.
Yeah. And I hope that you hear as we discuss this, every child is unique. And I feel like my children that do have ADHD have given me so much more understanding and knowledge as a parent that I just really love it. I love them. I love who they uniquely are. And as I've learned to change my expectations and learn how to work with them, I get such a joy in seeing the progress that they're making. And it's not less than my children without ADHD. It's just different. And I think dealing with these issues with executive functioning is one manifestation of how that comes out in parenting. So I hope that we've given you some feeling like if you're a parent like me who has this in your home, you're not alone, and also maybe some hope that it can get better. There's ways to work with it, and sort of a joy in engaging with your child in these areas.
Yeah. This is 10 Kids, 2 Docs. I'm Dr. Sylvia Bank.
And I'm Dr. Vivian Carlin. We'll see you next time.
See you next time.
Thank you for listening to 10 Kids, 2 Docs, hosted and created by Sylvia Bank and Vivian Carlin. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and recommend our podcast to other listeners. Visit our website at 10kids2docs.com, where you can find links to social media and leave comments or suggestions. Back next week with more topics in parenting.